Control is a fantastic game. I've played it through twice now, and my more recent run just reinforced my beliefs that this game should be praised for what it succeeds at. This video will be my attempt to praise it in the only way I know how. Anyone watching this should be aware that the entirety of this video will be spoilers. You have been warned. I will not be doing an entire story recap as I did for Alan Wake, or a segregated synopsis followed by a story section as I did with Quantum Break. This video will be structured in segments addressing other players who have already beaten Control, such as myself. I'll be assuming that everyone watching is aware of the overall story beats. I just want to talk about the specific things that make this game so unique and terrific. Just before I get into the more fun sections, I should probably talk about some of the more mundane stuff, like how I played the game. Originally, I played through the Steam version of the game and completed the entirety of the main game and 2 DLCs, including all Steam achievements. When I came back to it to record footage for this video, I decided to give the PC Game Pass version of it a try. I wanted to see if there are any differences in how it ran, and mainly see if I could recommend someone playing this version, considering how easily attainable the Game Pass subscription is, and how you could use it for PC or Xbox. Because this is the Game Pass version of the game, it did not contain the DLC, so because of that fact, I'll just be lightly referencing the game's DLC, but I won't be showing footage of it. Overall, the Game Pass version is entirely acceptable with a few quirks. My particular PC has an RTX 2060 and a Ryzen 2700X, and during my Steam playthrough, I mostly played with ray tracing on using DLSS, and it looks stunning. But my poor card would struggle to record under those conditions. For this reason, I ran it at medium and high settings to make sure everything went smoothly for recording purposes for this gameplay. The main quirk I noticed with the Game Pass version is occasionally I would run into some kind of level of detail bug where the textures wouldn't load in for an area, and that included some faces which take an already uncanny cast of characters and make them look frightening. This usually occurred after a fast travel at control points, and I would fix it myself by just quitting out and booting back into the game. I didn't notice this occurring on the Steam version, so I don't know if this flaw occurred because I was using the purely rasterized version of the game or because I was running the Game Pass version. I did test it briefly on my Steam version in DirectX 11 to see if I could replicate the bug, but it didn't seem to happen, so I don't know, man. It also seemed to run with a bit more overhead, using a little bit more RAM and CPU usage than the Steam version. But overall, I would give it a works on my machine seal of approval. As with any technical advice when it comes to computers based on anecdotal reports, take that with a heavy pinch of salt. My friend said his game kept crashing on his Intel-based system with a 3060 Ti on the Game Pass version, so I don't know. This guide is made for players that played the game, so that information isn't entirely as important to you guys, but I still figured it was worth discussing nonetheless. When it comes to the technical feats of this game, I think this game engine is absolute sorcery. The amount of environmental effects and debris flying everywhere from explosions is amazing. If you pick up a desk, the papers and crap on top will be flying everywhere. Throughout my 2 playthroughs, I still have never tired from taking a chunk out of a wall and using it to smash a dude's head like a watermelon. The fog effects from when one of the hiss evaporates into the ether is spectacular. The fluid dynamics of the smoke and fog blew my mind. I'd wander through it just to see how I affected it. By the end of the game, you're literally flying around giant open areas, and the game is rendering not only those massive spaces, but the impacts of you throwing fire extinguishers or forklifts at groups of enemies. I'm impressed by this Northlight engine. Whatever Remedy decides to do next, I feel they're prepared for quote-unquote next-gen, since I feel this game was already next-gen, even if it launched with the PS4 and Xbox One. I didn't play those versions, but I'm impressed they were even able to get this game on those consoles with all this crap going on. When discussing the graphics, it's important to separate the technical achievements of the game with the absolute beauty of the actual art style. Right when the game starts, Jessie walks into the FBC headquarters and is greeted by the most Spartan, utilitarian, government-as-hell looking lobby. As she proceeds and the game opens up, so does the old house. They did some kind of mashup where the environments are totally believable and built for obvious function, but they also reside firmly adjacent to the uncanny valley. Central Executive has a type of open atrium with a giant upside-down pyramid surrounded by offices. You spend tons of time in this area, especially in the early game, but I would bet tons of people started to zone out and forget that this strange and uncanny symbol is constantly looming above their head as they proceed to turn in a quest for or complete a task. Did you remember this was capping the room you spent all that time in? You're surrounded by strange, and at some point your brain starts to accept this as natural. There's some absolutely nutty set pieces, like the Twisted Passage, that are just artistic genius. This game never stops being stunning to me. You'll be bouncing from a vast variety of different areas, and each one remains visually stimulating and distinct and beautiful to the very end. Also, can I add that the assorted fonts in this game deserve a shout out? When you enter a new area, bam, hits you in the face. The maps, the quests popping up, everything has an accompanying bold-ass font that somehow sets a tone. I don't know if that's something I've ever made note of before, but it deserves it here. Some of the best work Remedy did on this game is within the writing for the characters, in my opinion. Our main protagonist is Jessie, so it's important they get her right. Thank God they did. She's had a strange childhood, to say the least. This has made her a bit of an oddball. She walks into a building thinking she's going to get a job as a janitor's assistant, and minutes later, she's the director of the bureau. Quite a shocking turn of events, right? She found a dead man and is remarkably stoic. I've seen people criticize her behavior here. She's supposedly looking for a lost brother under bureau control, and she proceeds through this building, accomplishing a number of other tasks instead of beelining it straight to him. I don't really necessarily agree with this criticism. The game takes pains to show she's never really fit in with the outside world. The madness that is the Bureau of Control is actually the first place she's felt comfortable in a long time. People have poked fun at her inner monologues with Polaris while mid-conversation with another person. I friggin' love this. At the beginning of the game, I thought she was breaking the fourth wall and talking directly to me as the player, only to find out she's talking to her closest remaining friend, an extra-dimensional being living in her head. Her backstory of finding a slide projector that led to a catastrophe in her hometown is super intriguing, and all of her other character quirks are easily explainable when coupled with all you learn about her. I also like how critical she is about all the other people she meets while having no concept of how strange she is. It's hilarious to me. She will have no problems noting in her head about how Pope has no sentimentality or how Overhill has tunnel vision, while not realizing she's having prolonged monologues leading to super awkward conversations with other people. When she meets Ahti, she's quite comfortable with the strange Finnish janitor, and she tells us that she's worked as a janitor in the past. This is the game telling you the outside life hasn't been conventionally successful for her. And if her internal monologues haven't made it clear, she's a bit of a loner. How about our boy Ahti? He's the first character that Jessie meets in the main story, and the old Finn is cryptic as hell from Jump Street. After meeting him, I literally DM'd my friend who has already beaten the game, and I told him, dude, I could tell, Ahti runs this place. After beating the game, I was right. You'll find memos and have conversations with people, and all of them have more questions than answers in regards to Ahti's story. He's just a mystery man who knows more than anyone, but will only share the information that he feels you need to know at any given time. Often I would be in the midst of exploring and I would hear the Finnish tango playing on the radio and see his little janitor cart. After I would destroy a room and completely mangle it, I would imagine him painstakingly reassembling it, so the next time I came back, everything would be as it should. When it comes to the writing of Ahti, they demonstrate what they need to. It's his world. You're just walking through it. Brilliant. It should be noted, on my first playthrough, I didn't notice, but Ahti can definitely read Jessie's mind. Several times he responds to her innermost thoughts as she converses with Polaris in her head. Did you notice that? I didn't.
There be work for the axe. Take them behind the sauna, jumalauta.
I've done enough night shift loner jobs to know it makes us come off weird. Artie the janitor is a friendly face in my book.
Better than somebody with no face at all. Think about it. No face.
Vacation? Right.
Yes, no one's gonna cancel my holiday or seat's gonna rattle.
She's talking to Polaris, and you as the player hear it, so when he responds, you don't really take note of it. But yeah, next time you play, just pay attention to that. Emily Pope is another early entrant into the Control universe, and she is spectacular. Jesse walks in as the new director of the Bureau only minutes after entering the building, and Pope is completely nonplussed. She's ready to go. "Jesse, you're amazing. Can I study you?" She often notes how left out of the loop she was by the prior director, and he really had a favorite few that he bestowed the most interest and responsibility. Her motivations are simple. She's scientifically inclined and interested in all the strange phenomena the Bureau deals with. She would do this job for free. I like how no matter what crazy thing happens, she's not off-put by it. To the contrary, she immediately begins to speculate on why it happened or how it could be dealt with. I'm a fan. Professor Underhill. Yeah, she's kind of a see you next Tuesday, if you know what I mean. Much like Pope, she's invested purely on an academic level. The work entices her, the job doesn't. She goes on to complain about the bureaucracy involved with the FBC, and she gives you insight that she left to go be a professor at one point. And that intrigued me because the idea of someone working here and knowing all these supernatural truths and then subsequently going back and working in the real world is a kind of novel idea to me. She doesn't care about the hiss at all. Does a damn mold though. Pretty interesting. Arish is super friendly and kind of an anomaly in this place. He actually kind of seems like the kind of guy I could grab a beer with. He has a good heart and a sense of pride in his service. He tried to join the Rangers, but inevitably ended up in security. Meanwhile, he has no bitterness for how his road took him here. His character stands in contrast with Marshall, who also takes the security of the FBC with all seriousness, but she's more the archetype you could imagine in this scenario. She's the type to live in the shadows, only dealing with the inner circle, solving the security concerns as she sees fit with little input and oversight. As the game concludes, you have another conversation with Arish, and he shows you that he would like more oversight and not less within the Bureau. Yeah, I like him more than Marshall, but she serves her purpose as well as putting a face on the old guard, since many of them aren't around to have a conversation with due to his complications. Or, in Trench's case, bullet complications. Professor Darling, he's omnipresent throughout the story. By its conclusion, you've never actually met him. It feels like you met him though, right? His story plays out entirely through assorted memos, FBC videos, and video logs he leaves in his wake. In the beginning, it's mostly memos describing altered items or objects of power, but by his final message, he's lost the plot a bit. Actually, I think I'll talk more about those messages in the collectibles section. Long story short, Casper Darling is another interesting character. Dylan. You only get a sense of the real Dylan based upon the recorded interviews and conversations with other people who interacted with him. By the time Jesse reunites with her brother, he's been infected by the hiss and is altered to an unrecognizable state. When you finally get a moment alone with Dylan, he can't stop pumping you full of information based on his dreams. A lot of these dreams end up being prophetic if you're listening close enough. This conversation in particular is also really great because the audio mixing is nutty. It'll shift from purely Dylan's voice to adding a hiss backing effect, and it's really creepy.
Funny. I welcomed the hiss. I let it in. To get rid of her. The hiss set me free. Polaris is using you. The Bureau is using you. You are a puppet. You can almost hear our words, but you forget.
The board. I don't have much of anything specific to say about them, but I couldn't exclude them from this segment. The Foundation DLC added a bit to their backstory, but information on them is still very limited. The way they address you is brilliant, and yet again, ultra strange. For extra-dimensional creatures, I can't imagine anything more perfect than an upside-down pyramid followed with muffled noises and strange-ass subtitles to convey their messages. I enjoyed / liked their inclusion / existence. Langston! Frederick Langston is the first employee that actually feels like a government employee. When asked about how he got his job, he basically tells Jesse that he started at the bottom and just did his time. Eventually, his supervision material just moved up by attrition. The man is there just to pick up a paycheck and a pension. I imagine there's a Langston at every one of America's DMVs. I don't know who's my favorite character in this game, but Langston is certainly up high on the list. In the DLC, he has a moment where he will rant for an inordinate amount of time about everything. He thinks he's some sort of altered item whisperer. Darling is some sort of golden boy. He has his neighbor Maria check on his cat Alfred by 7 p.m. if he isn't home. He has been missing a lot of Alfred's meals lately. Also, he should probably buy an arrangement for Maria since she's been so helpful. Alfred's a great cat who he got just before Sylvia died. Sylvia was a real asshole who didn't tolerate most people, places, or things. I know it's unprofessional to use that terminology about his cat, but you have to understand. Yeah, I love Langston. I think he gets lonely in the Panopticon. He also does some sort of free-form poetry that's breathtaking. The rest of the characters in the game are actively engaged with trying to solve the Hiss problem or find some sort of crazy truth in this crazy world. Langston's just trying to track down the problems so somebody else can solve them. Chef's kiss on this one. The final character that should be addressed is the old house itself. The FBC office cannot be found by people not wanting to find it. The building has shifts where rooms will disappear for days at a time. There are signs everywhere warning of potential environmental hazards. Just like any other office building, except instead of warning you to wear your PPEs or stay off your phone while driving, it'll be notes about potential building shifts or notes not to eat the mold. Typical government job trying to run my life, am I right? I heard those recordings from the dudes down in the pit. They ate the mold and it seemed like a good ass time.
Oh, so good. Oh, need more.
The old house is amazing and never ceases to surprise me. In my first playthrough, when I saw the portrait of director Jesse on the wall shortly after becoming director, it caught me off guard. Stuff like that will happen constantly. If you are forewarned that the entirety of the game will be taking place inside an office building, I think most people would assume they would tire of that environment. In truth, you have journeys to the astral plane, which is super stark and plain while also being awe-inspiring. Vast emptiness combined with giant pillars sprouting from the nothing. You have the aforementioned haunted office aesthetic. There's a pit where an old lab area was overtaken by mold outbreak. Yeah, I know, Underhill, it isn't technically mold, but you get the point. There's the maintenance sector with giant hulking machinery, which is used to power this giant complex. The Panopticon is set up like a prison sci-fi novel. The giant sky-high circular structure is lined with cells featuring common household objects. Research is built straight up vertically. The central research area is another giant atrium with levels going high in the air. Due to the light coming in, it doesn't feel like an interior space at times. Spread throughout the areas, there are assorted labs with various purposes. All of them lack the adornments of more personal spaces. They have stuff like yellow paint partitioning an area for safety purposes or something of that nature, and tons of notes. I love it. The old house keeps the hits coming, so when you're transported to a random motel in Butte after pulling a light cord, it catches you off guard, but at the same time, you've been shown by that point that in the old house, anything's possible. I'm gonna lead with what I appreciated most about this game, and that's the way they handle exploration. At first I was peeved by the way the map is very primitive and doesn't give you a lot of information, especially in terms of verticality, especially in a space like the oldest house that isn't only set up on a horizontal plane. As I played, I found that moving through the old house was fantastic, and this limited map was not a hindrance at all. Remedy had clearly signposted all the areas to make exploration feel exactly like that. Exploration. The HUD is minimal, and in the end you don't end up following the map or some icon on the ground. You're actually surveying in front of you. As the game progressed, I found myself very comfortable navigating the spaces in the old house because I remember the paths I'd taken. You remember the places you've been if you're actually walking around paying attention to the world around you instead of an icon. The first time I accidentally busted open a wall behind a painting and found a chest back there, it opened my mind. For the rest of the time playing Control, I was whacking the hell out of any wall with a painting on them. All of the hidden areas are clever as hell, and if you're looking around, you'll feel rewarded for paying attention. This isn't Wolfenstein or Doom where you're going to be walking around against walls smashing interact. All the secret areas have some hint or indicator that something's there. It's brilliant. I'm infamous amongst my friends for loving what I refer to as the shinies. Shinies are any tiny collectible or item that can reward me for checking the other path. In one game, I infamously spent a ton of time trying to track down literal trash in the game world to throw away. This game has endless shinies. So many shinies. Sometimes it's a memo telling people that they don't get overtime for being locked in a room due to a house shift, or sometimes it's a mod for Jesse's weapon, but there's always something. Quick anecdote. I found a TV with a fireplace on it next to the furnace, so I guessed I was supposed to throw it in. You can't destroy the TV otherwise. It only gets destroyed if you throw it in the furnace. So I was like, okay, I'm supposed to throw this TV in the furnace. I found another one in the pump room next to the elevator. Later I found another one in a nearby closet. That was the only 3 that I found in my first playthrough, so nothing came of it. This time I found 2 more before I finished playing, and so I decided I'd look up what was going on with these TVs. It turns out I was right, and there is actually a 6 TV you can throw in the furnace. By doing this, you get the best weapon mod in the game. I didn't take advantage of it this time because by the time I took the time to look it up and figure it out, I was done with recording footage. I was done with this playthrough. But if anyone has any plans of doing subsequent playthroughs, be aware that this exists. It's an awesome Easter egg, and who knows what else Remedy threw in that I didn't even find. When it comes to how you explore, the level design is great, but it's made even more great by the way that you're forced to interact with it. Just kudos, bro. Jessie is a Jedi Knight in the battlefield. She can pick up items with her mind and devastate foes while flying in the air. Her melee strike is also a force strike. I've seen criticisms on the lack of difficulty options one way or the other. By endgame, this time I had done every quest available, so I was overpowered as hell. It didn't bother me. Her force powers are not complex, and for me, the combat tended to fall on the easy side if I truly took advantage of my force throw. I just didn't care though, because that shit was crunchy and satisfying as hell. I definitely fall into a trap of doing the same things over and over, so I can understand some people criticizing that, but I'll be damned if I personally care. Fighting the Hiss is just fun. The smoke from their evaporating bodies and the explosions of all the impacts never stopped entertaining me. It feels visceral and impactful. Remedy also does a good job introducing a wide variety of foes in a well-paced fashion as the story continues. If I had any criticisms, it would be that I wish they gave her a bit more in her toolbox. I literally never use the shield abilities or C's. C's takes too long to execute, and the payoff just isn't worth it. Even maxed out, the balancing of the shield rush made it underpowered and a poor use of her energy meter. Not to mention, it's just definitely less interesting than her launch. I'm not usually the guy who feels educated enough to discuss balance in most games, but it's pretty clear that launch is a bit overtuned. Being a Jedi god amongst ants isn't exactly a problem for me, but I can see that bothering some. I just wish there were more force powers at my disposal, but the lack of more didn't really leave me wanting until it came time to critique The only area that left me slightly wanting is the mod system. You can upgrade Jesse's personal mods and her weapon mods. The problem is, even after completing the game and both DLCs, I found that the assortment of mods was kind of wanting. It's serviceable, but I never picked something up that truly felt game-changing. So on my second run, I hardly spent any time upgrading them. I did find a mod that combined all the shots from Shatter into a single shot, changing the mechanics of the gun, which is a super interesting mechanic. But sadly, those kind of items are few and far between. Also, goddamn, Remedy, why the limited inventory space? Having to deconstruct mods because I'm full up all the time is a drag. In the end, though, the combat satisfied me throughout the duration of the experience, and that subject's going to be one of taste. A hard mode wouldn't hurt this game, even if I personally probably wouldn't use it. The difficulty tends to come from overwhelming numbers and being hit hard by enemies in Remedy games. As it is on normal, you could be punishing enemies and get caught off guard and get melted quickly. Making Jesse more fragile wouldn't satisfy me, but I'm sure there's some who'd appreciate it. Ooh, let's talk shinies. As you make your way through the old house, you'll find a variety of different types of memos, correspondence, videos, and assorted workplace materials. These were very much a main driver of the experience for me. I never stopped wanting to learn more about this universe, and Remedy kept rewarding me. I want to quickly make a run through my favorite materials I found. I'm going to start off with the first example of a room that I walked in that was completely covered in sticky notes. The memo left explains that one of the post-it notes was an altered item that kept duplicating itself. The employee went home to work until further notice. Hilarious at first, right? Then I thought about it. Did the post-it notes save this man's life? Without the post-it interference, he would probably be one of those floating hiss bastards. Dude, maybe the first good altered item in this game? Perhaps. There's a description of how the Bureau writes public-facing documents, including agent death notifications. This includes a list of words to use and words to not use. There's a note from an awkward field training voice actor complaining that he didn't know his voice would be used, and now he's being harassed by his coworkers. If you remember the field training segment, this is amusing. There's one that lists the items banned from entering the Bureau, including smartwatches, smartphones, quote-unquote anything smart, most basic modern technology, and interestingly, number 2 pencils, and any objects considered iconic representations of an archetypal concept. Examples include rubber ducks and ketchup bottles. That one got me. There's an explanation of how the Bureau's funded. The old house protects even their budget from scrutiny, and to any accountant in Washington, the budget just appears as any other line item. You'll encounter several book club notes. My friends had a lot of fun with the book club. They're like, this book club's savage. But the one that was the most intriguing to me was by Philip. He describes the book Unless You, which appears to be very self-referential. He describes the book as open-ended, familiar but a little off, has clunky dialogue, and he questions the protagonist's motivations. Why would someone follow orders during a time like this? He said he tried to go with it and not take it too seriously. Any of that sound familiar? There's a note about the house shifting away, the executive bathroom. This man worked in no man's land for ages, and all he wants is a place to crap. He implores someone to find it. There are tons of dead letters which contain possible intel on altered items or AWEs. Also nut jobs. Lots of nut jobs. There were Bright Falls supplements containing information on Alice being trapped in a threshold and returning damaged and mentally scarred. Alan manifested the AWE, which those of us who played Alan Wake are well aware of. I was never tired of finding notes on the assorted altered items. I could make a whole segment just about the memos on these altered items. Some writers had a hell of a good time thinking of mundane, everyday objects to get possessed and go wild. There's a breakdown of the hiss incantation that is repeated throughout the game. Interesting fact, want is the most used word. There's a memo about a certain Agent Filson who put his packed lunch in the work fridge and lost it to the Nether Realm. He lost his damn mind and had to be disciplined. We all know where that fridge went. There's a proposal for the first episode of The Threshold Kids. Slow down, I'll get there. The writer claims they took a class in puppet making at the local community center, and they think they could make a show to educate kids on the dark realities that children involved in the Bureau would have to know. Maybe this puppet maker could take another class or two. There are also notes regarding the AWE and Ordinary, giving complete backstory to the events of Jesse and Dylan's childhood. These are not addressed directly in game, so only those who truly care will find all this information. I really like how this was done. It really rewards exploration. The Astral exhibition was originally set up to be training grounds for the astronauts until they accidentally brought back the astral entity. Then they used it like a zoo. They figured the area could mimic its natural environment, like putting a stick in a jar for your pet frog. And finally, one I really enjoyed was where they talk about a synchronicity experiment they did. A crew set up multiple rooms with the exact same decorations, and all of them had TVs in it. The plan was to change the channel on all of the TVs except for one. If it worked, the final TV should synchronize and change its own channel. The plan failed, or so they thought. All the agents started to feel the effects of clinical depression of one of the other members of the team. You will also encounter recordings from a show called America Overnight. This show is controlled by the Bureau as some sort of misinformation campaign. All these shows are super interesting, and it makes you think about some of the oddball stuff you can find out here in the real world and ponder their purpose. In different offices and areas, there will be video presentations playing. Most of them are aimed at a visitor just learning about the area. All of them are directed like a student project. You can imagine some scientist tasked with making this video for a section with no video experience. All the acting is relatably bad, like a student project again. Nail on the head with this one. There's this one poor research assistant in the research sector video that will always have a place in my heart. Trench and other characters can communicate to Jesse through hotline, and the scenes are impeccable. Often they use FMV clips with the real actors interspersed with the in-game assets, and the results are excellence. Again, the feeling presented is just pure liquid strange. Last, but definitely not least, is the episode of Threshold Kids. Damn, these are so off-putting. I'm sure someone out there dissected each film and broke them down, and it's certainly deserving of it. I won't go that far, but I just want to acknowledge how good these segments are. The creepy factor knob is cranked to 11, and it's tremendous. Uncle Mr. Bones will live in my nightmares for some time now. Oh, was that? He didn't creep you out? What about this?
Topher. Too many slip-ups and your father will have to go on vacation without you. You don't want to end up like Meg, do you?
Or this.
Some brains can talk to each other. We call this ESP.
ESP?
Interruptions!
Stop lying to yourself. I'd like to make a note of certain things I enjoyed about the side content. Often this was my excuse to re-examine areas with newly unlocked powers and see if I could find more shinies. Gotta go back to Ati here. He gives you several tasks that sound on paper like typical janitor work, but with a certain FBC flair. The segment with Jesse talking to the plants got to me. At first she's off-put by the strange nature of the request, but by the end she's really venting and getting stuff off her chest. She's sad to finish and regrets having no more plants to talk to. I get the feeling that she spent the bulk of her time in life speaking to Polaris in her head, so there's something different about speaking aloud and putting that energy into the universe. The clog cracks me up every time. If someone tells you that they have to take care of a clog, this is not what anyone is imagining anywhere. A Matter of Time opens up a threshold corridor for you. I didn't realize it, but if you were so inclined, you could miss out on this whole segment, including the clocks and the anchor. This area is super crazy with clocks duplicating and filling the entirety of the space. Pretty cool. I can't imagine playing through this whole game and not going through this area, but it's wholly possible if you're not doing any side content, and I appreciate the commitment by Remedy to have faith that the content they put in the game was good enough to warrant people wanting to explore it. The whole segment with the mold was great, and finding a monster that was the source was really cool. I also felt this was the most well-designed boss in the game. The irony is that I never really figured out how to fight it. I beat it twice now, but I certainly didn't master it. Either way, I thought it was well done. I also liked all the context, explaining how the mold would smell good to people, drawing them in to eat it and become infected. Even Jesse was not totally immune to its charms.
I found all 5, but I kind of wanted to eat them.
I would be surprised if most people don't fondly remember the fridge. The experience of finding a man on his last legs, forced to stare at an old-timey fridge, is something not all too common. Langston being forgetful of his employee's existence is also not all too surprising. When you finally go to relieve him, he finally succumbs to the force in the fridge. I don't know what I expected inside that fridge, but it sure as shit wasn't the former. The Foundation DLC gives you more background, as he is in fact a former board member. The whole side mission was genius, and I won't forget it anytime soon. Lastly, I should talk about Langston's runaways. These altered items were all super enjoyable to hunt down. They were not all engaging in a gameplay sense, but the intrigue coming from the items themselves was a solid motivation for me. I mean, I was hunting down a rubber duck making obnoxious quacking noises at me. That was a first. The mannequin segment was one of the more visually striking areas. As the corridor twisted, I got notably discombobulated. I love this area, and also the view of dozens of mannequins in a twisted corridor was definitely noteworthy. The traffic light forcing you to play red light, green light was charming and different. I like the level design again here. The flamingo space was super fascinating in appearance as well. I flew everywhere throughout this game, so flying here was right up my alley. I really wish I knew the individual writers in charge of deciding which items were going to be in the Panopticon. Who said yeah? One will be a rubber duck. Oh yeah? I want a surfboard. Well, I want an oscillating fan. That seems like a fun meeting room. Throughout its duration, Control has references to Alan Wake and Bright Falls. My first playthrough, I had surface knowledge of the premise of Alan Wake, but no more. On this subsequent playthrough, I've noticed a ton of small things contributing to those I get that moments. Firstly, the Bright Falls DLC prominently features Dr. Emil Hartman from Alan Wake. The AWE has caused him to be affected by the darkness in such a way where he's vulnerable to light. It's extremely thematic, and I enjoyed the hell out of it. Without the context of Alan Wake under my belt, I respect it even more now. The way they injected the Alan Wake hotline messages was brilliant and really sync up with what they did in the actual game, as he spends much of the game narrating with the words from his manuscript. In your conversation with Dylan in his cell, he tells you a tale about Mr. Book who's transdimensional. He meets up with Alan Wake, who's been trapped in a threshold. Alex Casey is in another universe that he visits, and he is real as well. Anyone who's played Max Payne probably agrees with that. In a recorded conversation with her therapist, Jessie has mentioned her favorite poem from her favorite poet. The therapist looked into the poet, Thomas Zane. She can find no evidence of him existing. She seems to believe that Jessie wrote the poem. We know different, don't we? I should have made notes as I was playing for all these little Easter eggs to better catalog them, but the purpose of this segment is simply to acknowledge that they're there, and to say that I really appreciate the attention to detail here. This is truly an extended universe, and it feels that way. Okay, can we all just agree that the fake out ending was awesome? Thinking that in the light of Hadron's death, that Jessie would simply be overtaken by the hiss was super smart. The messed up credits and the hiss scrawl was perfectly executed. Arriving in the office, you may or may not remember what Dylan told you about his dream, where he was the director and he gave you a job where you were always busy and everyone was happy. He told you about all of this. I even like how the saturation of the game world is different at this point. By the way, I got busy on those coffee cups, player. 10 out of 10, would upvote again. One of my friends liked the game, but he was bummed when he didn't get a final battle with Dylan. I think this is a fair expectation. The game doesn't have a final boss. Dylan also encountered Polaris and had the same experiences with the AWE as Jesse, so my friend had the thought that he could have some kind of superpowered Marvel villain final boss. He didn't have the same contact with the objects of power that Jesse had. I don't know what implications that would have for gameplay or any of that, but it's one reason that I have an understanding of how they ended it. She's been unsuccessful in her prior attempts to help people affected by the hiss, and leaving him in a coma made sense to me both from a story perspective and a gameplay perspective. I mean, if Jesse's reunited with a perfectly functional Dylan, it might make her less inclined to pursue her directorial duties. Just my thought. You have your own opinion on that one. In regards to the actual ending, I've heard some people criticizing the lack of answers given to you by the story. For me, one of my favorite things about this universe was the questions I was left with. The story is very open-ended, and you definitely aren't told finite answers about every single question you have. I'm a fan of this. I was left wanting more. Part of what makes this fun is the intrigue. The mysterious nature of the building, the different altered items, the AWEs, and the origins of all of them are not even truly understood by the Bureau at times, so I'm accepting of not having all those answers myself. In fact, for me, having those answers would be a detriment to my interest. You need that thread that you want to continue to follow. Some people want the bow on the package. I understand that sentiment, even if I don't agree on this one. Neither opinion's right or wrong, but I'll side with Remedy here. Rather than having a separate soundtrack and audio design segment, I figured I would leave it here. It's self-evident. Even people who are not as big of a fan of this game as I am surely can't have much bad to say about the music. It's creepy and strange, just like the setting. The background tracks often have an off-putting industrial sound that'll likely raise your hackles a bit. The combat score rises in and soars behind you and has been perfectly designed to adjust to how many enemies are left and how close you are to them. As you put distance between you and your enemies, the music will slowly fade and you'll feel safer the tamer the score gets. Conversely, if there's still a nearby foe you can't see, you'll still know there's someone close by, and the sound will be backing you, pushing you to victory. One thing that really got to me was the sound of the hiss spawning into an area. It gives you a clear indication that you're about to have an enemy encounter, so it worked well for gameplay purposes, but the sound was also so fitting and satisfying. There's also an audio sensory lab at the bottom of Central Research featuring a song called My Dark Disquiet from Poets of the Fall. I not only listened to the song multiple times, both playthroughs, but each time I played around with the directional audio while doing so. It's kind of fun. I filled out the questionnaire found in the booth as well, so I gotta ask you, did a picture of a weapon form in your mind during the song? Yeah, me neither. I already mentioned how much I enjoyed hearing Ati's tango and finding the accompanying cart nearby. Good work, man. The music did a good job attaching itself to my recollection of events. When I think of Control, some of the music and sound effects will be linked to my memory of the game. And that was one of my criticisms of the music of Quantum Break. It's hard to write good music. It's even harder to write good music that perfectly meshes with the game and the world they're trying to create. And they were successful here, if you ask me. Well, I guess that's it. Nothing more to discuss here. I think I've covered everything about this game I wish to talk about. Is there anything else?
Take control. Take control.
Yeah, just as Alan Wake fought hordes of darkened enemies on the stage of the Anderson farm with a killer backing track, you get to travel through the ever-shifting ashtray maze, dumping on your hiss enemies. One of my favorite things about this song in particular is the fact that the song starts with Take Control and ends with I Control. And the entire segment makes you realize just how far Jessie's grown in power during this game. She's now a super-powered beast who can rip and tear through these hiss bastards. The level design is fucking incredible here. The maze rising and falling beneath your feet is exhilarating. The thing is as amazing, pun intended, as the ashtray maze is itself. The lead up to it and finding Ati is almost as great. Firstly, you start with a literal vision quest where you're visualizing an idyllic scene guiding you on a path there. Then you're led to take an old-timey cable car contraption down to a dark pit by bright visions. Ati is on some hell of a vacation. When he hands you his Walkman, he tells you this song is a gift from his friends to you. It is from the old gods of Asgard, another reference to our friends from Alan Wake. I wanted to finish with the ashtray maze because this segment of gameplay is something I don't think I'm soon gonna forget. Honestly, most of this game is something I won't soon forget. Hence this long-ass video proclaiming my love for it. Whatever project Remedy takes on next, be it a sequel to Control or Alan Wake or another new offshoot in this universe, they will get my money. I'm interested to see where they take me next. My hope was that someone like me would eventually find this video who liked Control as well, and they would have a reason to reminisce. To be thankful that someone else found the same satisfaction. This has just been my opinion on the game and my love letter. Thanks to anyone who made it through. Take care. Young out.
Nobody knew her name, but she turned up just the same. There was a knock on the door, a thump on the floor, and the party turned insane as she called out